300 Blackout subsonic ammunition is an absolute kick to shoot. I'm always amazed at how quiet it is, and I love the fact that I can hear my hits on steel clearly when I'm shooting. The problem, it can be really expensive to shoot and really expensive to reload. Gavin here from UltimateReloader.com. In this video, we're going to take a look at some special bullets from Barry's Manufacturing that can provide a solution to this cost problem for 300 Blackout subsonic loads. I'm talking about Barry's Spire Point 30 caliber plated 220 grain bullets that are optimized for 300 Blackout subsonic performance. And I just looked at Mid-South Shooter Supply to compare the cost of these bullets with a typical 200 to 250 grain premium jacketed bullet, and they come in at just barely over half the cost of those bullets. So the good news is, with bullets like this, you can afford to shoot more 300 Blackout subsonic, and in this video, I'm going to show you all of the data. I was in the laboratory, took a whole bunch of measurements, and produced some data to evaluate the consistency and quality of these bullets. I put a reloading setup together here that I'm going to demonstrate. I've got some load data that I'm going to share. I've got chronograph data that I'm going to share, and some accuracy data as well. So let's get started. Before we get into the reloading setup and process, I want to talk briefly about the components that I settled on for the loads and the performance data that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So of course, I'm using the Barry's 220 grain Spire Point plated 30 caliber bullets. I'm using brand new Starline brass. If you're going new, I would go Starline. And if you want to go once fired to save a little bit of money, Capital Cartridge has 300 Blackout once fired, and with the Ultimate code you can save to 10%. So two different great options for 300 Blackout brass. For powder, I started with CFE-BLK. My SDs were really high on the velocity. I'm not sure exactly what was going on. I switched to H110, and that improved things a bit. Like a lot of people would recommend, I'm going with small rifle Magnum primers rather than conventional small rifle standard primers. And the reason is these hotter primers, especially with powders like H110, can help the powder burn more consistently, and that's going to lower your SD numbers, and that is what I observed. So the press I'm using for loading here is the Hornady Lock and Load AP 5-station progressive press. This is a great press for loading pistol ammunition or rifle ammunition. I've got the KMS squared UFO press light. I hope that's not blinding you. It's really bright and it makes it really easy to see down into the case to do a powder level check and generally to see what you're doing. And I've got two dies here from Redding. I've got their 300 Blackout full-length sizer, and I've got their competition cedar die with the micrometer. Absolutely love that. Makes it really easy to get your bullet seating depth dialed in quickly and effectively. So let's walk through the stations here. Station number one, I've got the full-length sizer backed out because I've got new brass from Starline, and I'm just punching that expander ball through to uniform the case neck and to make sure it's the appropriate diameter for proper bullet tension. Now, if we were reloading previously fired brass, I would just adjust this so that I checked with the case gauge and made sure that I was sizing it back down to the proper spec. Ellie Wilson makes a great case gauge. So that's station number one. Station number two is empty, but we're priming on the bottom stroke down there. Station number three is the case activated powder measure, so we're dumping a powder charge there. Station number four, we've got the bullet seating die, and station number five is empty for this particular setup. And each time we pull the handle, we're gonna put a case, station number one, put a bullet just ahead of station number four. That's gonna index half on the way up. Case activated powder measure, just dumped the powder charge, and then we're gonna press forward to make sure that we're priming positively. One thing that you will notice with 300 Blackout, I've got my hand there, for a reason, is these cartridges are really top heavy. They're really wonky from a balance standpoint. So I've seen all sorts of special setups for case feeders, for bullet feeders, and for ejection here, sometimes I've found that it just kind of wobbles out and then falls forward. So if I keep my hand in place there, I can prevent that from happening. Just like that, if it wanted to wander forward, I would just kind of guide it into the completed cartridge bin. Not a big deal. These are the kind of things that you have to account for with each of your special setups. So it's a quick process. If you've used a single stage press, see there goes the cartridge out the back. If you've used a single stage for this kind of a reloading process, you know how quick this is to get a completed cartridge with each pull of the handle. About all there is to it. So that's the loading setup that I used for all of this ammunition. Let me next talk about what I'm going to use the ammunition for, my corresponding goals, and then my load development process. So this ammunition is for close quarters, fast action shooting on steel. A lot of it's around 25 yards, maybe a little bit further out, 35, 40, 50 yards. But a lot of it kind of more between 20 and 40 yards, kind of in that range. And so accuracy is not something that I'm super picky about for this particular scenario, but I do want to retain energy. I want to have enough of a tolerance below the speed of sound. Say where I'm at, it's 1,130 or so feet per second at this elevation, about 1,300 feet, up to 2,050, depending on which part of the mountain that you're on. So I really want to be just under that. I want to be at about 1,050, 1,000, somewhere in that range. And in terms of accuracy, if at that 25-yard range I'm at a half inch to an inch, it's going to be plenty good because the targets are relatively generous based on this kind of fast action offhand shooting that I'm doing. So I started out with CFE-BLK, Federal 205 standard small rifle primers, the Starline brass, and the Berry's 220 grain bullets. I looked at the load data from Hodgdon.com, and overall the functioning was fine, but what I did notice shooting across the chronograph was that my velocity variation was high. I had an SD of about 65 feet per second on some of the strings that I shot over the chronograph, and I thought it might not really matter for what I'm doing, but I want to see if I can get that number down. So I did a little bit of research and I made some changes. There was 3 changes that I made. The first was to switch from CFE-BLK to H110, another very popular 300 Blackout powder. I also switched from standard small rifle primers to Magnum small rifle primers, which are also used for 5.56 ammo, the military specification. 223 and 5.56, very similar. The military uses primers that are just a little bit hotter. Turns out those can help burn these powder charges for subsonic 300 Blackout ammunition more consistently, and I did notice that. I also cranked down my seating depth from 2.260 inches, which is the maximum length for an AR-15 magazine, and that's what Hodgdon specified, to 2.230 inches, because I know H110 likes to have high powder charges. It likes to not have too much airspace, things like that. I thought maybe that would help bring the burn consistency up a little bit. Well, let me tell you, when I shot it across the chronograph, this H110 load, I tried 2 different load levels, one at 9 grains and one at 10 grains. Things improved considerably. At 9 grains, we had an average of 977 feet per second and an SD of 15.6 feet per second. That is really good for an AR. That is really good for 300 Blackout. At 10 grains, I was at 1,114 feet per second average. That's a little bit higher than I want to be at, but I had an SD of 8.5 feet per second. That's more like what I would expect out of a match rifle. An AR shooting 300 Blackout offhand, close range, that's way better than I even need it to be. So I did not do extensive load development. This ammunition was functioning well. Let me talk about the rifle real quick. You're going to probably recognize this CMMG Resolute lower because this is half of the rifle that I used for the 350 Legend project. So this is the upper, it's a Resolute 300, really nice AR-15. I've got a TriggerTech AR Diamond, 1.5 pound trigger in the lower, and that's why I used it for this particular project. This really shoots well. I was using a different sort of more mil-spec type lower, and instantly when I slapped the upper onto this CMMG Resolute lower, I noticed a huge improvement. I like the ripstock. I like that AR diamond trigger. What a difference. Plus, I think it really looks cool, the black and the burnt bronze Cerakote. I've got a Strike Eagle 1-6 power scope, and that's working pretty well for some of this close quarters shooting on steel. It's quite a bit of fun. It's got a 16-inch 1-8 twist barrel, and I'm using a Silencer Co. Omega 300 suppressor, 30 cal. So I really like this setup, and I wanted to talk about the rifle briefly because it helps set expectations in terms of what you could achieve with your 300 Blackout subsonic ammunition if you're going to use some of this load data. Always double check, triple check, cross-reference load data. Assume my data is wrong until you validate it multiple times elsewhere. Heavy disclaimer. So I'm happy with the performance. The functioning is 100%. The steel mag wasn't the best. I'm going to look into a better mag solution in terms of loading the mag, and sometimes it felt like the cartridges wanted to bunch up a little bit, but functioning was really, really good. In terms of accuracy, I set up a cardboard box at 50 yards. I wanted to do 50 yards because that's more representative of the kind of shooting that I'm going to do with this ammunition, and I wanted to set my own expectations accordingly. And what I found was, with this Starline brass, with the Barry's bullets, with the H110 powder charge, it was doing really well. At 50 yards, I had right around 1 inch performance. One of the groups came in at exactly 0.9 inches. So if I'm shooting at 25 yards, that means I'm going to be less than a ½ inch if I can hold the same accuracy. I was shooting off of a table with some bags. So, you know, that's what the rifle and the ammo can do. And then there's my own human factors. And this is all about speed and getting on steel. So I know that's a big part of the challenge. All that to say, this load is working really well and the performance is awesome. So next, let's talk about some of the laboratory data. So in this tested series, the laboratory data is really all about the evaluation of the consistency of a particular component. And this is a tested bullet story, so we're really looking at 3 things. We're looking at weight data, diameter data, and length data. And we're looking at the consistency of those values. What I did for the testing was to take these 20 samples. I've got 20 bullets here, and I put each of these 20 bullets through a set of tests, gathered the data, and I'm going to share the high-level summary of that data. So for weight, we wanted to be at about 220 grains, obviously. The average was 220.05 grains. I'm using an A&D FX120i scale here, a very accurate scale down to 2/100ths of a grain. Very good repeatability, very good accuracy. So the standard deviation on the weight was 0.4 grains, and the extreme spread was 1.18 grains. So the total variation was 1.18. And statistically relevant, the variance is 0.410 grains. Really good numbers for bullets that are going to be used for this type of purpose. For the diameter data, I take 2 readings on each bullet. I take a reading at one location, and then I spin the bullet 90 degrees, and then take another reading. And I'm using a 10,000th micrometer and logging the data straight into my spreadsheet program via the phone. And this was very consistent data. The standard deviation on these diameter measurements was 1/10,000th of an inch. The extreme spread was 3/10,000ths of an inch, and the average was 0.3082 inches in diameter. So the spec on these bullets is 308 plus 1,000th minus 0, and it falls kind of right in the middle, and that's a really good indicator of the quality of these bullets. The length data, I took a 10,000th micrometer and took length readings for each of these 20 bullets, and that yielded an average of 1.3541 inches a standard deviation of 2.9 thousandths of an inch, and an extreme spread of 0.0105, so 10.5 thousandths of an inch. I expected a bit more variation on the length for these because they are plated bullets and they don't have a polymer tip, that kind of thing. So I'm really happy with the performance of these bullets and the corresponding load that I've worked up. I'm almost ready to mass produce ammunition based on this load, but not quite. The 9-grain load that I evaluated was a little low on velocity. The 10-grain load was too close to the speed of sound, so I'm going to probably look at knocking that down by a half grain for right in the middle, splitting the difference. 9.5 grains. I'm going to take a look at my SD and the velocity. I'm going to take a look at my accuracy and look at my average velocity to make sure that I have that extra little bit of headroom that I want while retaining as much energy as possible. I'm really looking forward to bulk loading thousands of rounds based on this recipe and using these various 220 grain bullets because I want to get really good with this rifle at close proximity on steel, fast action shooting. This is totally awesome. My question for you is, what do you think of these Barry's 220 grain 300 Blackout bullets? Do you use them? Do you want to use them? Are you having trouble with a load that you have? Do you want to share about the rifle that you're shooting 300 Blackout subs with? Please drop a comment and we'll start a discussion. Are you shooting a bolt action rifle with loads like this? I'd love to hear what kind of results you're getting. Now, don't forget that first link in the video description is going to link to a full article with links to product pages, discounts, stuff like that. You're going to want to check that out, and I'm going to have all of this data there in table form as well in case you want to geek out on that. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications because I've got a lot more Barry's Manufacturing, Barry's Plated Bullets products coming up. We're talking about 9mm, 45, a whole bunch of fun pistol stuff. I'm going to hopefully look at 9mm Subsonic 147 grain bullets. I've shot Hush ammo and had a lot of fun with that. I'd love to make my own. So it's going to be fun. We've got a lot of great stuff coming up. Thank you for watching. Until next time, happy shooting and happy reloading.